So, hi everyone. I would ask you to put your headphones. Hi. Yeah, if you want to follow the event, you have to put the headphones on. I would like to welcome you all here today and thank you for joining us while so many other interesting discussions are going on. My name is Alice. I work for WWF Portugal, and we are here today for this event about youth voices and their role in local and also international level climate action. We at home in WWF Portugal will work in several areas, and recently we have added to our experience in nature conservation a new focus on climate change in order to be able to tackle this joint crisis of both biodiversity and climate change. And within this scope, we are specifically working with subnational climate action with both cities and youth. That's why today we decided to bring this discussion about the role of youth and the impact of youth engagement, starting at local level, but with actions and impact that can scale to the global level and really make a difference when it comes to achieving our global targets. So, without further ado, I would also like to introduce my fellow panelists that will be joining us today in this discussion. Brahima Bari, that is representing here today OPE Ecoclubes Portugal. He will speak more about the recently drafted National Youth Agenda on Climate Justice. And also Axel from Generation Climate Europe. He will be sharing some lessons from the work that they have been carrying out in climate advocacy at European level, but also beyond the European level. So, all introductions done, I would like to start with my brief presentation, in which mostly I hope to share with you a little bit about the work that we have been doing in Portugal with both cities and youth. So, how are we working to foster youth engagement in local climate action? We are doing this through the Life as Up project. This is a project funded through the Life as Up funding by the European Commission, and right now we are operating in 4 different European countries: Portugal, Hungary, Romania, and Sweden. But our goal in the second phase of the project is to scale our work to as many EU countries and as many cities as possible. Our overall goal is to accelerate climate action in EU cities by enhancing access to climate policy assessment and advice, and also supporting cities in engaging their citizens in their local climate action. So, why are we working with cities? Probably this is not new to you, but cities drive a very big percentage of our GDP. They are home to more than a half of the world population, and if we consider consumption-based allocation, they are also behind a big percentage of the global emissions. So cities and action for adaptation and mitigation in cities is crucial for us to meet our global climate targets. So cities are a problem space, but they are also a space for solutions, because in cities with many people getting together, and they also have characteristics that promote efficiency and exchange, we have lots of opportunities to take ambitious climate action. So, in the end, what we understand is that cities have a critical role in the global response to climate change, but many times they don't have enough resources to carry out their climate action. That's why our focus is on cities and in cities climate action. How are we working with cities? So first, we try to engage them in reporting their climate action targets and plans with a focus on climate integrity. And after they report, we provide them assessments and recommendations to keep improving. Second, we do capacity building. So we try to increase the capacity of beneficiary partners in all these countries. So right now, Hungary, Portugal, Sweden, and Romania. And we also try to improve the capacity of local civil society in order to have more people in civil society able to provide a technical and strategic report to cities and actively engaging in the climate action implementation and policy decision making. Finally, we try to engage citizens, focusing right now in youth and try to mobilize them to have an active stance in the city decision making process. So why this link between local governments and public engagement? So local governments are our closest democratic entity. So here we have lots of opportunities for getting citizens and local decision makers together, right? But also municipalities, city officials face many challenges when it comes to doing public engagement. The main obstacle we hear about from cities is lack of time, lack of staff, lack of resources, and really listening and taking the time to integrate the proposals you have received takes time and takes resources. But many times we also forget the impact of not doing proper public engagement. And many times this can lead to wasting time, wasting resources, missing opportunities because we have not heard from those that are expert in the city, that are residents themselves, right? So to summarize, our strategy here is working with cities to get them to report and provide them specific recommendations to improve. Also engage youth and citizens so this work regarding climate action plans is done in a collaborative and inclusive way. So getting back to youth, because this is our focus here today, what have we been doing so far in what comes to youth engagement? Bear in mind that the project started in the beginning of 2024, so we have still a long way to go. But so far what we did was conduct several workshops with youth groups in each of the municipalities with whom we are working with. Today, right now in Portugal we are working with 3 municipalities, Almada, Cascais and Braga. Maybe those from Portugal will know. And from these workshops, the youth groups developed one set of youth policy recommendations for each municipality. Finally, we did meetings between local decision makers and youth in order to present their recommendations and also for the local decision makers to provide feedback on what they think about the proposals. Now in December we will launch a final activity this year, which is a call for a small grant support for youth climate projects. So we beyond giving capacity, we also want to give financial resources for implementing youth climate projects. To end with, I would like to share some takeaways and lessons learned from this work so far. So what we see in the youth policy recommendations that were developed so far is that youth have focused on urban mobility, green infrastructure, and also creating incentives for climate positive behaviors. But I think the most important thing is that we clearly see in all proposals that they have made a link between climate action and measures to improve the quality of life in the city. So this shows that they have made very clear in their proposals that we can act for the future and to reduce emissions and achieve global goals, but also have tangible impacts in day-to-day life of residents in the different cities we are working with. Finally, some lessons learned from us as non-youth actors trying to engage youth. So we saw the importance of managing expectations of both youth and decision makers. So many times the youth participating had doubts about whether their opinions would really be heard. Would local governments really listen? So we had to do this process of encouraging them and empowering them without creating false expectations. So this is a difficult balance to reach. Also, regarding local government, many times we saw that city officials expected the proposals to be very concrete, very ready to implement, but sometimes citizens, including youth, don't have the same amount of information as local governments. So we have to make this clear distinction between the role that belongs to citizens and the role that belongs to local decision makers. Also, we saw that there's a need to build trust relationships to overcome some mutual skepticism that there is between youth and decision makers. So this means that many times young people have had the experience of trying to participate but not being successful and not being listened. So we really need to work with local decision makers to have them understand that they need to provide feedback. You cannot only ask for information and ask for participation without giving some feedback back. And that does not necessarily mean saying we will do everything that you want. Sometimes you say it's not possible for this or for that, but we are trying to do this instead. But feedback is essential. Finally, what we saw as well is that making it about the city makes it very specific to both youth and local decision makers. So because young people were speaking about the place in which they live, they felt experts about their cities. Maybe they don't feel experts about climate change, but they feel that they can really talk with property about how the transport system works because they catch the bus every day to school, right? So this makes it more personal to them, and they feel more entitled to have a say on these matters. And on the other hand, local policymakers are also able to provide very direct feedback because it's not an intangible thing or a very difficult thing to speak about. Many times we are speaking about things like creating a new bus line. So this is quite a concrete action, right? So we saw this as a very interesting thing. It's more specific to talk about local sometimes maybe than the national or the global level. And I will end here and give the floor to Brahima. Can you step up? Brahima will be speaking in Portuguese, but he will have English slides, and then the rest of the discussion will follow in English.
Eu tenho que deixar isso lá. Se calhar eu deixava isso aqui. Pode ser assim. Assim? Pode ser? Bom dia. Está bem? Ok. Saúde a todos. Gostaria de cumprimentar a Alice, a doutora Alice e demais colegas que estão aqui representados. Gostaria de agradecer aos parceiros que nos apoiaram para estarmos aqui a apresentar a nossa agenda, que é uma agenda concebida no âmbito do diálogo global sobre justiça climática, que foi promovido pela UAII e foi apoiado e patrocinado pelo Global Emergence Fundo para a Ação Climática. Eu estou aqui em representação dos Ecoclubes de Portugal, que é a organização para a promoção dos Ecoclubes de Portugal, que tem envolvido os jovens na promoção na promoção de literacia ambiental, sobretudo no envolvimento desses jovens na proteção do ambiente a nível local. Esses ecoclubes funcionam como um modelo de envolvimento juvenil a nível local, transformando as suas consciências e permitindo que haja ferramentas capazes de mobilizarem ações em prol da sustentabilidade e ação climática a nível local. Antes de iniciar com a apresentação mesmo desta agenda, era preciso explicar que esta agenda tem como objetivo proporcionar e capacitar os jovens, sobretudo no domínio da ação climática e proteção ambiental, e ao mesmo tempo criar estratégias de auscultar os jovens no sentido de advogarem, ou seja, de proporem as suas visões estratégicas, recomendações junto dos decisores políticos. Então, esta agenda, na altura, quando foi concebido, envolveu 8 sessões de capacitação da equipa técnica que recebeu no domínio da advocacia ambiental, e esses jovens, ao sofrerem 3 meses de formação, conseguiram trabalhar nas 3 fases. Na primeira fase, envolveu um encontro nacional de jovens, onde os jovens foram auscultados, e esses jovens, ao forem escutados, proporam as suas ideias, as suas recomendações, a forma como eles veem a realidade local, que prendem com questões climáticas e ambientais a nível local e a nível nacional, e proporam algumas soluções que acharem que era pertinente para serem levados aos decisores políticos. Então, houve essa sessão de auscultação, e na segunda fase fizemos uma pesquisa bibliográfica e depois fornecemos um formulário online também para poder garantir que os jovens estão participados e estão envolvidos no processo, para que não tomamos decisões assim muito precipitadas. Podemos ver aqui nesse gráfico, Portugal tem cerca de 10 milhões e 516 mil e 621 habitantes. Dentro desse, ou seja, número, podemos destacar aqui que 15% são jovens que têm idade compreendida entre 15 a 29 anos de idade, e esses dados indicam que dentro desses indicadores temos 33% dos jovens que já emigraram. Por exemplo, esse é um dado que foi trazido no âmbito de um estudo feito pela Estatística de Data Europe, que foi feito ainda bem neste ano, foi atualizado, onde pretendiam estudar qual é o nível de participação e envolvimento dos jovens nas políticas climáticas e ambientais. Então, esse estudo trouxe aqui que cerca de 66% dos jovens que são estudantes, maioritariamente auscultados, revelaram uma preocupação enorme no domínio do ambiente, ou seja, na preocupação sobre questões de alterações climáticas. Só que nessa percentagem, apenas 17% desses jovens que estão a participar por meio dos ONGs, associações que estão a ter um papel ativo sobre a questão de adaptação, mitigação e sensibilização dentro das comunidades. Os desafios que encontramos dentro desta agenda, ao fazermos algumas pesquisas bibliográficas, encontramos que nos desafios é que nós não conseguimos, até neste momento, ter um plano coordenado, atualizado a nível dos 308 municípios, um plano sobre mudanças climáticas, ação local, que foi desafiado aos municípios para submeterem esse plano, para implementarem ações estratégicas adequadas que visem reforçar ou atender às leis básicas do clima. E dentro desses municípios podemos ver que os desafios, que apenas nos 308 municípios, apenas 124 municípios que conseguiram ter um plano feito. O porquê que os restantes municípios não conseguiram? Porque encontraram dificuldades em termos técnicos e depois revelaram questões de financiamento, ou seja, questão de investimento a nível de recursos humanos e técnicos. Sabemos que Portugal está comprometido com questões climáticas. Então, podemos ver os desafios nos incêndios, podemos ver desafios a nível de seca, na precipitação, ondas de calor, vagas, temperaturas elevadas. Estamos a registrar nos últimos momentos fraca participação, né, das pessoas no que diz respeito a nível de separação dos resíduos, o que tem gerado também uma grave preocupação a nível de consciência ambiental, a nível de separação e triagem dos resíduos sólidos. E podemos ver também que as águas, outras zonas estão a ficar sempre secas, zonas mais agrícolas. Queremos que esses são os desafios que nós encontramos, que nós achamos que é importante vermos como oportunidade de podermos melhorar e envolver os jovens nessas políticas, sobretudo que visem incentivar a participação dos jovens no domínio da ação climática. Podemos ver as chaves, ou seja, as áreas-chave dessa recomendação, que os jovens foram escutados nesse âmbito. Nós destacamos a mobilidade ambientalmente responsável e justa, como uma forma de poder envolver os jovens para perceber quais são as suas percepções e o que eles gostariam de ver como concretizado. E podemos ver também como consumo, alimentação responsável e preços acessíveis. Podemos ver na área de gestão de recursos hídricos face à residência seca. Podemos ver na área de gestão de florestas e proteção da biodiversidade. Não sei. Acho que eu... Não sei. Ok. Tem quantos minutos? Ok, já vou terminar também. Está bem. Ok. Na recomendação dos jovens, como podem ver nesse slide, na área de mobilidade ambientalmente responsável e justa, os jovens recomendaram melhorias nas ligações ferroviárias, tanto internas como internacionais, com particular destaque para a necessidade de reforçar conexões entre Espanha e Portugal, reforçando assim uma cobertura nacional por meio de vias de mobilidade suave, aumentar redes de ferrovias. Os jovens também recomendaram incentivos fiscais e municipais quanto ao uso da bicicleta e criação de ciclovias interconcelhares que ligam zonas residenciais e industriais, facilitando a mobilidade sustentável em todo o território. Como também foi recomendada a promoção da energia limpa e investir na introdução de veículos elétricos nas linhas intercidades. Os jovens também apelaram ao introduzir esses veículos elétricos para desincentivar a extração grosseira dos litos. Nossa, ok. Na área de consumo, alimentação responsável e preços acessíveis, os jovens recomendaram que era importante reduzir os preços de produtos biológicos e sustentáveis através de incentivos governamentais ou subsídios diretos aos produtores locais, tornando estes alimentos acessíveis a toda a população, especialmente aos jovens. Promoção da economia circular na alimentação, incentivando a criação de cooperativas de consumo que permita uma relação direta entre consumidores e produtores, como forma de reduzir a dependência de grandes cadeias de distribuição. Os jovens também recomendaram para apostar na educação e na sensibilização para o consumo dos produtos sazonais e na educação alimentar, que valorize a dieta mediterrânica, essencial para a saúde e redução de pegada carbónica. Apostar na produção de conhecimento científico e desenvolvimento de tecnologias que promovam a inovação e sustentabilidade, nomeadamente na área de indústria, embalagens biodegradáveis, engenharia de materiais e engenharia natural. Na gestão de resíduos, não sei se já percebeu, o nosso computador aqui não está a facilitar. Ok. Na gestão das florestas e proteção da biodiversidade, os jovens apelaram e recomendaram aos decisores políticos no sentido de adotarem maior apoio à reflorestação com espécies autóctones, em detrimento da monocultura de eucaliptos, que têm contribuído para a degradação dos solos e aumento de incêndios. Incentivo aos projetos de compensação do carbono, como envolvendo empresas públicas e privadas que promovam a proteção de áreas florestais e a conservação da biodiversidade. Por fim, nessa área, foi recomendado para ser feita uma revisão de políticas de gestão florestais para que estas se centrem na preservação dos ecossistemas e na mitigação das alterações climáticas. Na parte da economia circular e gestão de... Ok, estou a terminar. Na economia circular e gestão de resíduos, os jovens recomendaram que é importante promover incentivos à reutilização de reciclagem de materiais e redução do consumo de recursos naturais e a diminuição da produção de resíduos, assegurar políticas de incentivos à gestão de resíduos sólidos que envolvam tanto as autarquias como o setor privado, com especial foco na criação de infraestruturas adequadas para triagem, separação e recolha seletiva de resíduos. E também recomendaram que seja apostada mesmo, que seja depositada uma aposta na educação e sensibilização para a economia circular, integrando esta temática nos currículos escolares e promovendo campanhas de consciencialização na comunidade. Como podem ver, essa agenda não foi concebida apenas para propor aos decisores políticos as recomendações dos jovens, mas como também visa mostrar que alguns jovens estão a lutar, estão comprometidos para levar esta agenda cada vez mais à frente e está comprometido para envolver mais jovens que estão a ser deixados atrás por conta de desigualdade social que estamos a ter. Esta agenda foi concebida por um grupo técnico multidisciplinar que humildemente e sabiamente conseguiram abdicar-se, conseguiram criar espaços de soluções e criaram sinergias e deram o seu contributo para fornecer insights relevantes e recolher opiniões dos jovens, sobretudo para serem levados à presidência da República e poder ser apresentado aqui hoje nesse evento importante. Esperamos com esta agenda vamos conseguir adaptar e chegar aonde queremos, que é uma transição justa e eficaz, de forma inclusiva e impactante. Muito obrigado e estamos juntos. Obrigado, Alice. Obrigado a toda a organização. Obrigado. E também gostaria só de recomendar que quem quiser ter acesso à agenda pode ler, quando o quer. Temos aqui um documento muito robusto de todas as metodologias e fases que nós aqui apresentamos. Muito obrigado. Desculpe.
I would now call Axel here to the floor and to give some words, and then we join together on stage to have a brief discussion.
Good, lunchtime everyone. So it's quite an honor to be here in the Portuguese pavilion. I had the honor to be in that country once, and I'm very happy to go back at some point. So I first of all, I just wanted to reflect a bit on what I just heard. So I think it's very inspiring to hear about the One Planet City Challenge and how young people have been involved in those activities, because it's really a good example of, implementing a transition to a sustainable urban environment and being there in the whole process, really giving support. So I just want to commend those efforts. And Brahima, I'm very inspired by seeing how you collected the opinions of young people and really formulated it into concrete solutions that can be implemented by policymakers at the local level and together as municipalities. So I represent Generation Climate Europe, which is a European youth organization. In fact, it's the largest youth-led coalition of European youth organizations on climate and environment. And I will just start off by saying what is my main message for this presentation. It is that we as young people are leaders already today. When we are empowered with enough resources, capacity building and other conditions, we can be leaders. Not only of the future, but already today. So the first example of what we have done to show this is we have been involved in the EU Critical Raw Materials Act. And this is something very technical in the sense that it's a legal text which might be very far removed from the realities on the ground, but what it basically does is It's a regulation within the EU on the extraction and use of critical raw materials, which are elements that are used in the green transition. For example, for much of our technology today is based on that, and electrical vehicles, tying back to this clean mobility. So one of the big problems with this is that often when extracting critical raw materials, it comes at a huge expense for the environment. Both the local environment in terms of pollution, in terms of health hazards, basically for the local communities. We have seen several examples of increased cancer rates in areas around sites where critical raw materials are extracted. And another big issue is that per gram of critical raw materials, there is a lot of waste that's generated and quite a lot of emissions as well. So when the EU was regulating this, it was done without very much transparency towards the civil society, and this is something we as Generation Climate Europe, together with other civil society organizations, wanted to change. So what we did was we joined a coalition of civil society, both young civil society and also, well, not specifically young civil society, having coordination across the European continent to really put pressure both on the national level and on the European institutions such as the European Commission, Parliament and other, and the European Council. So with this broad coalition, we have now pushed for this for quite a while. As of yet, we haven't really finished our advocacy, it still continues. But what I would say is our main success is that we have gathered not only young civil society, which is often the case, but actually civil society across sectors, across generations, because this is an issue we care about, all of us. And one of the big learnings from this as Generation Climate Europe is that coming in as a youth organization, which is mainly volunteers based, it is very hard to be in the locations where the lobbying happens. So most of us cannot be in Brussels where the European legislative process is happening, and we cannot spend a full-time, basically the equivalent of a full-time job on this every day, which many of the other NGOs can do. So this is something we have learned, and that we have collaborated with these NGOs to make sure that we as youth can do this as volunteers as well, and can do it as equals. So this is something we have learned. The second example I wanted to mention, which ties back quite a bit to what Brahma mentioned on nature-based solutions, is the EU Nature Restoration Law, which was adopted in, let's see if I remember, I think it was July of this year, after over 2 years long legislative process where at some point it seemed like this law would go through, and at some point it seemed like it wouldn't, but finally it was adopted. And what we have done through this process is that we as the youth movement have been very clear that we need to restore areas that have been degraded, making sure that biodiversity comes back, making sure that carbon is stored in these restored lands, which is what the nature restoration law is all about. And so what we did was, in this case, we formed a coalition of European youth organizations which together advocated mainly on social media and through public statements to put pressure on decision makers. One of the big problems we were trying to address in doing so it was that much misinformation was spread in social media in terms of that this nature restoration law where areas would be restored would come at the expense of local communities, basically that villages would be razed and so that nature could go back, which was entirely false. We as the youth movement of Europe tried to combat this and say that this is false, and this law is exactly what we need to make sure that we're not disappointing future generations. We need these, need nature to be restored in order to meet our targets under the Paris Agreement, and also our targets under the new global biodiversity framework. So one of our big learnings of this is that since this process has been so long, the young people that have been driving this have been shifted several times. So in Generation Climate Europe, we have had at least 3 different teams working on this. And for this, we need to have a continuous structure to be able to conduct that advocacy. We need to make sure that there is transfer of capacity, knowledge across the teams working on this in our organization. So with these 2 examples, I wanted to illustrate that we as youth need enabling conditions, such as having support with the limited hours that we can give to our advocacy, and also having structures that support us to basically participate in decision-making rooms, making sure that we can transfer knowledge across our generations internally in the organization. And if that is done, you can really count on us as young people to be leaders together with other generations already today, not only in the future. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Now it's on. Okay. So I would ask both Brahima and Axel to join me here on stage. So we have like a very brief time for some discussion. I wish we could have a little bit more time, but we have to stick to the schedule, so maybe we can continue the conversation later. So I have just one question for each of you, and I ask you to give like concise responses. And I think the questions really tie back to what you both have said. So for Brahima, my question is, what are key lessons for effectively scaling youth participation in climate policy making? Because you told us about the fact that many young people are interested in the topic, but not many really do engage. So what are some things that you think should be done to engage more with youth and increase their engagement?
Sorry, I will speak in Portuguese, but my colleague she is translate. Yes, okay. Okay, muito obrigado. A minha experiência no envolvimento nos jovens, as lições aprendidas e conexão com essa malta, com a realidade, permitiu-me encontrar alguns indicadores que demonstram que esses dados são relevantes, ou seja, são relevantes e preocupantes. Porque nós, quando divulgamos os eventos nas redes sociais, percebemos que a informação já chegou a toda pessoa, a todos os jovens que estejam aqui nesse território, principalmente em Portugal. Mas a realidade é que prova-nos ao contrário, porque tenho assistido a alguns eventos, mas esses eventos têm sido preenchidos por geração ainda que nem sequer nos representa enquanto jovens, tipo, mais avançada, que já tem um papel ativo na comunidade, que já passou aquela fase da juventude. Então, eu acho que as lições aprendidas em termos de envolvimento dos jovens, isso tem a ver com a parte de informação, fazer chegar a informação aos jovens, essas informações, como é que nós estamos a comunicar. É dessa forma que nós não estamos a conseguir impactar os jovens e chamar-lhes para a agenda que queremos que elas façam parte. E também a outra parte, a realidade vivida, é que a questão de estilo de vida, habitação, em termos de custo de vida, tem deixado os jovens atrás. Sabemos que questões climáticas têm a ver com sensibilidade e compromisso. E quando se fala de compromisso, sensibilidade e compromisso, também o componente financeiro, neste momento, na era digital, é importante e é fundamental. E é preciso que também olhemos para esse indicador como crítico e preocupante, porque se um jovem não tem uma capacidade financeira, económica, que possa lhe permitir assegurar a sua cesta básica em casa, aí fica complicado ele comprometer-se a envolver-se nas iniciativas de voluntariado ou, sobretudo, nas iniciativas que lhe chama para ação. Por isso, nos projetos que eu participei, eu vi também, de outra parte, os jovens que estão a participar mais são os jovens que estão na universidade, nas escolas, que têm um contacto frequente com os docentes e as escolas. Por isso, eu acho que é isso que estamos a ter em Portugal e não só. Acho que é geral. Obrigado.
Thank you, Brahima. I will briefly translate what Brahima said. Basically, he said that two essential elements for engaging more youth is information, providing information, and the way you communicate with them. So is the information really coming through? And the other very important point he raised is that many times young people are not able to participate because they don't have the means to. So in order to have compromise and carry out your action during the time that you need to achieve results, you need to have a stable income, your living conditions. You have to have at least a home and everything else. So now to end with, I will ask Axel, also tying back to what he said, how can non-youth actors such as ourselves, WWF, really collaborate and support youth voices instead of trying to speak for you, give you the floor to speak in an accurate way?
So I just want to say I really appreciate this question, because often we don't receive the assumption that we would be given the floor. It's rather how can we carry your voices for you. So I think this is really the right way to approach it, that basically as there's no one who can tell a story better than the one whose story it belongs to. And that goes also for young people. So the first thing I would recommend is having a clear mandate or role that we as young people are invited to. We are very happy to consult with other young people and try to bring as many young voices with us as possible, as long as it's clear what will be the impact of those voices. What are we being invited for? Will it actually be followed up? Will it be taken seriously? Often we're invited to events and then we speak and we don't really see any follow-up. We are not even involved in the continued dialogue. And that brings me to the second important practice. It is ensuring continuity, ensuring that it doesn't just stay in one moment, one specific event or one specific consultation, but rather that we're involved in preparation, during decisions, and also following up those decisions and being part of implementing it as a collaborator, not as just a beneficiary. And then the third aspect I want to mention is ensuring that we have autonomy, giving us enough support so that we can carry our voices ourselves. This means providing finance as relevant, providing capacity building in cases where we don't have the expertise necessarily, and providing other administrative support. Because as I said before, as young people, much of our environmental work is done on a volunteer basis. And I know I myself have spent I don't know how many hours preparing travels, preparing accommodation, filling out long application forms, which takes much time away from what we actually want to advocate for. So really helping us with ensuring that we can spend most of our energy actually advocating for the causes that we're invited for is helpful. I think I'll stop there, but I'll just repeat those three main messages. Ensure mandate, continuity, and autonomy.
Thank you, Axel, for those clear three takeaways. So we will finish here. Thank you, first of all, to Brahima and Axel for joining me in this discussion. Thank you very much. I think we got both a national and a more European level experiences here. And also thank you all for joining us. I hope that we can continue the discussion after the panel has finished. Thank you.